The scream didn't come from fear. It came from disbelief. "Mom, step away from the counter. Now!" The security guard's hand hovered near his radio as the woman in the pale blue cardigan stood frozen under the fluorescent lights, her medical bills sliding off the counter and scattering across the tile. Other patients stared. Some turned away. Shame travels fast in quiet rooms. Her name was Laura Mitchell, 62, recently widowed, retired school librarian. She had come to the county hospital to ask why her insurance suddenly refused to cover a heart procedure that had already happened. She had expected confusion, paperwork, waiting. She had not expected to be accused of fraud. "You altered the claim." The billing supervisor said voice, sharp eyes cold, "That's a felony." Laura's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her fingers trembled as she bent to gather the papers. Her breath was shallow, too fast. She pressed one hand to her chest, more out of instinct than pain. Across the room, near the row of vending machines, a woman watched. Early 30s, plain gray slacks. No badge that stood out. Her name was Hannah Reed. To everyone else, she was just another compliance clerk, the kind people never remember. But Hannah saw the details others missed, the supervisor's jaw tightening, the subtle pause before the word felony, the claim number printed in the wrong sequence. 1 digit off, not an accident, a switch. The guard reached for Laura's elbow. "Let's go." "No," Hannah said, not loud, not dramatic, just enough to cut through the air. Every head turned. The supervisor frowned. "This doesn't concern you." Hannah stepped forward anyway. Her shoes made no sound. Her posture was calm, but her eyes were sharp-focused, already tracing patterns. That claim was rerouted internally after approval, she said. "I flagged it last week." The supervisor laughed short and dismissive. "You're mistaken." Hannah didn't blink, then pull the audit log. Silence spread. Heavy, the kind that presses against the ribs. Laura looked at Hannah, eyes wet, searching for something solid to hold on to. "I didn't do anything," she whispered more to herself than anyone else. "I know," Hannah said. She met Laura's gaze steady and certain. "You didn't." In the corner, a man in a dark coat lowered his phone. He had been listening, watching. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He glanced at his watch, then back at Hannah, as if seeing her for the first time. The supervisor cleared her throat. "This is inappropriate." "No," Hannah said again, firmer now. "What's inappropriate is threatening a patient to cover an internal diversion." A murmur rippled through the waiting area. The guard hesitated. The man in the dark coat stepped forward. "She's right," he said quietly. No one recognized him yet. They would, just not today. The supervisor's smile didn't break. It thinned. A professional reflex, sharpened by years of knowing exactly how far authority could be pushed without leaving fingerprints. "Sir," she said to the man in the dark coat, "this is an internal matter." He didn't answer her. His eyes stayed on Hannah. "What's your employee number?" he asked. Hannah didn't hesitate. She gave it, calm, flat. No pride in it, no fear either. The supervisor's head snapped toward her. "You don't have to." "Yes, she does," the man said, still quiet, still controlled. The room felt smaller now, as if the air itself had tightened. Laura clutched her papers to her chest. Her knees were shaking. She leaned against the counter to stay upright. The guard glanced between them, uncertain, suddenly aware that the situation had slipped out of the clean script he'd been trained to follow. Hannah spoke again, voice steady, but edged with something sharper. The claim was approved at 11:22 in the morning. 37 minutes later, it was reassigned to a secondary review queue that doesn't exist on the public system. Only 3 supervisors have access to that pathway. The supervisor laughed again, louder this time. Defensive. That's absurd. It would be, Hannah said, if the log didn't show your credentials. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was worse, a low collective intake of breath. People smelled blood before they understood what it meant. The man in the coat finally turned to the supervisor. Pull the log. Now. And if I don't, she challenged. Then I will, he said, and the version I pull won't give you time to edit it. Her eyes flicked to his face. Really looked at him now, the lines at the corners of his eyes. The way he stood, without urgency, without explanation, as if he had nowhere else to be because time bent around him. You don't have that authority, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. He reached into his coat and took out a badge. Not flashy, no gold seal, just a name and a title that landed like a dropped weight. Chief Executive Officer. The word rippled through the room in whispers. CEO. The guard straightened instantly. The supervisor went pale. Hannah didn't react. She already knew. The CEO looked back at her. You've been tracking this longer than I have, haven't you? Yes, she said. Because it's not just one claim. Laura let out a small, broken sound. How many, she asked. Hannah answered, without looking away. Enough to know it's deliberate. Silence fell again, heavier now, final. The CEO nodded once. Then, we're not here about a billing error, he said. We're here about a system that learned how to eat the people it was built to protect. And for the first time since she walked into that hospital, Laura Mitchell felt the ground stop shifting under her feet. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant, the kind of place where decisions were made quietly and lives were altered without signatures. Laura sat nearest the door, hands folded tight in her lap, eyes fixed on the tabletop, as if it might tilt and throw her off again. Hannah stood by the window, arms loose at her sides, watching the parking lot below, counting exits out of habit she had never fully unlearned. The supervisor had been escorted out without a word. No cuffs, no scene. Just a door closing softly behind her. That silence felt louder than shouting. The CEO sat at the head of the table. Daniel Cross, early 50s, the kind of man whose authority didn't announce itself. It settled. He studied Hannah with an intensity that wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. You didn't bring this to internal audit, he said. They close ranks, Hannah replied. Too many careers tied to clean reports. And you, he asked. Why not escalate? Hannah's jaw tightened just a fraction. Because escalation alerts the people who know how to erase trails. Daniel nodded once. Approval, not surprise. How long? 4 months, she said. Longer if you count the pattern before I had proof. Laura looked up. You knew, she whispered. Not accusation. Awe, fear. You knew this was happening to other people. Hannah turned to her. Her voice softened, but the words didn't. I suspected. Then I verified. The door opened. A man in a suit entered, late 40s, sharp eyes, a legal pad already filled. Marcus Hale, general counsel. He didn't sit. He leaned against the wall, listening. Tell me about the diversion, Daniel said. Hannah spoke like someone reciting coordinates under fire, precise, unemotional, approved claims redirected into a shadow review queue. Delays force patients to accept reduced settlements or pay out of pocket. The difference gets written off internally as processing loss. And the money, Marcus asked. Hannah finally looked at him, moved through a vendor shell, consulting fees, performance optimization. Marcus exhaled slowly. That vendor answers to my office. The room shifted. Daniel's gaze snapped to him. Not angry, assessing. Marcus straightened. Before you say it, I didn't know. But someone wanted proximity to legal oversight for cover. Laura's hands began to shake again. "My husband trusted this system," she said. "He paid into it for 40 years. Daniel leaned forward, "And we failed him." Silence pressed in. Not awkward, heavy with consequence. Hannah broke it. "This isn't about reimbursement anymore." Daniel met her eyes. "No, it's about exposure and prevention," she said. "If we stop now, they'll adapt." A pause. Then Daniel smiled. Brief. Cold. "Then we don't stop." Laura looked between them, heart pounding. "What happens to me?" Daniel turned to her. His voice was steady, absolute. "You get your coverage restored today, and tomorrow you testify." Her breath caught. "Testify, yes," he said, "because this doesn't end in a boardroom. It ends in daylight." Hannah returned to the window, watching the lot again. Somewhere below, an ambulance pulled in lights, flashing doors already opening. The system was still running, but for the first time, it was being watched by someone who knew how to dismantle it from the inside. The first mistake they made was assuming the room was private. Hannah noticed it the moment the secure line clicked alive, a fraction too late, a breath of static that didn't belong. She didn't react. She never reacted first. She let the voices continue, let the confidence settle in. On the other end of the line, someone laughed, low, male, relaxed. "You're overthinking it. The claims spike will get buried in quarterly variance." Daniel Cross leaned back in his chair, finger-steepled eyes fixed on Hannah. He said nothing. He didn't interrupt predators while they spoke. He learned more that way. Marcus Hale scribbled a single word on his pad and slid it across the table. "Proxy." Laura sat rigid, every muscle locked. She could hear her own pulse. She felt like she was trespassing in a world where words carried legal weight, and silence could destroy people. Hannah spoke at last. "Variance only works when the losses look random." The voice on the line paused. "Who is this A problem?" Hannah said calmly. "You rerouted 17% of cardiac claims through a vendor you incorporated 8 months ago. That's not noise. That's structure." Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "You don't have proof." Daniel leaned forward now. "We do." The call went dead. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Marcus exhaled slow and controlled. "That was our head of regional operations." Laura's voice shook. "So he's the one who—" "No," Hannah said. "He's one of them." She stood and walked to the whiteboard, uncapped a marker. Her handwriting was clean, deliberate. She drew lines, names, arrows, money flows. Human decisions made cold and distant. "This isn't fraud for profit," she said. "It's leverage. They pressure patients into settlements, then redirect gratitude toward intermediaries. Political donors, hospital boards, insurance partners." Daniel watched the diagram take shape. His jaw tightened. "They're building protection." "Yes," Hannah said. "And silencing anyone who notices." Laura swallowed. "Like me." Hannah met her eyes. "Like you." A knock at the door. Soft, controlled, security. Daniel nodded once. The door opened just enough for a guard to lean in. "Sir, compliance has locked their servers. They're claiming a breach." Daniel smiled, thin and humorless. "Of course they are." He stood. The room shifted with him. "Then we move faster." Marcus closed his pad. "If we go public, they'll burn everything." Hannah capped the marker. "They already are." Daniel turned to her. "What do you need?" Hannah didn't hesitate. Authority, full access, and permission to be unpopular. He considered her for half a second, then nodded. "Granted." Laura felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief, not safety, something stronger. Direction. Outside the window, storm clouds rolled in low and dark. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. The system was panicking, and panic always meant mistakes. The email went out at 6:13 in the morning, timed to hit inboxes before coffee and denial. Subject line plain: mandatory systems audit. No explanation, no apology. The kind of message that made people sit up straight before they knew why. By 6:40, servers began to lag. Not crash, lag. Hannah watched the dashboards from the temporary command room eyes, scanning for patterns, fingers still. Panic didn't look like shouting. It looked like sloppy cover. "They're pulling historical logs," Marcus said, voice tight, selective. Daniel stood behind Hannah, close enough that she could feel his presence without turning. "Can they erase enough they'll try?" she said. "That's the tell." Laura sat in the corner, wrapped in a borrowed blazer, listening to the room breathe. She had slept maybe an hour. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the supervisor's face calm, and certain, telling her she'd committed a felony. The lie had almost worked. That frightened her more than the truth. A junior analyst rushed in tablet, clutched like a shield. "Sir Compliance is issuing terminations. 2 mid-level managers, claiming independent misconduct." Daniel didn't react. "Sacrifices," he said. "They think that will satisfy us." Hannah finally turned. It won't. She stood and walked to the glass wall, tapped twice. Screens shifted. A map of internal access points bloomed to life. They're dumping data through an overseas relay. They think jurisdiction buys time. Marcus swore under his breath. "We need federal involvement." Daniel nodded. "Already done." Laura looked up sharply. "Already last night," Daniel said. "I didn't become CEO by waiting for permission." The door opened again. This time, 2 men entered. Plain suits. No badges displayed. One, older eyes tired. The other, younger jaw, set hard. "Mr. Cross," the older one said, "we're here about your referral." Hannah studied them. She always did. The way the younger man scanned exits. The older one's slight limp, real, not posturing. Daniel gestured to Hannah. "She's the reason you're here." The older agent raised an eyebrow. "You?" Hannah met his gaze. "Yes." He nodded once. Respect earned fast or not at all. "Then show us." As she walked them through the architecture of the scheme, Laura watched something shift in the room. Not hope. Resolve. The agents stopped asking whether, and started asking how many. How many patients, one asked. Hannah answered without hesitation. Thousands. But the worst damage isn't financial. Daniel looked at Laura. "It's trust." Laura swallowed. "What happens when they come for me?" Daniel didn't soften his voice. "They already have," Hannah cut in, "which is why she's not going home." Laura's breath caught. What Daniel nodded. Protective placement. Temporary. The word temporary echoed like a door closing. Laura nodded anyway. Fear had stopped being the loudest thing in her chest. Outside, rain began to fall, heavy and relentless, streaking the glass. The system was bleeding now. And everyone in the room knew one thing. Bleeding systems don't heal. They expose what's been rotting underneath all along. The safe apartment smelled like fresh paint and quiet decisions. Laura sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched, listening to the unfamiliar silence. No hospital beeps, no raised voices. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain tapping the window like a reminder that the world was still moving without her permission. Hannah stood near the door phone, pressed to her ear voice, low. "No, not yet. If they move funds now, well, see where they land." She ended the call and leaned back against the wall, eyes closing for half a second. When she opened them, the steel was back. "They're scared," Laura said. "Yes," Hannah replied. "That's when they make mistakes." A knock came, controlled, deliberate. Hannah checked the peephole before opening the door. Daniel stepped inside, coat damp expression unchanged. He carried a folder, thin, dangerous. They reached out, he said. Laura's grip tightened. Daniel set the folder on the table and slid it toward her. The vendor shell. Or what's left of it. They're offering restitution. Confidential settlement. Full coverage. Lifetime. Laura didn't open it. She stared at Hannah instead. So this goes away. Hannah's jaw tightened. For you. Yes. Daniel met Laura's eyes. And for everyone else, it keeps going. Silence stretched. Laura felt the weight of the offer settle on her shoulders. Safety, privacy, no more courtrooms, no more interviews, no more reliving the moment she was told she'd committed a crime she didn't understand. I am tired, she said softly. I buried my husband last year. I don't know if I have this fight in me. Daniel didn't interrupt. He waited. He understood fatigue. He'd built an empire on it. Hannah crouched slightly, bringing herself level with Laura's gaze. They picked you because you looked breakable, because they thought you'd take the quiet exit. Laura's eyes filled, but her voice didn't break. And if I don't, then they have to explain why, Hannah said. In public. Laura finally opened the folder. She skimmed the pages. The language was clean, generous, final. Her hands began to shake. Daniel spoke again carefully. If you say no, this will get harder. They'll question your memory, your motives, your character. Laura nodded. I know. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the glass. Laura looked up at the window, then back at the two people standing in her kitchen. One powerful, one precise, both waiting. She closed the folder. I won't disappear, she said. Hannah exhaled slowly. Not relief. Respect. Daniel nodded once. Then tomorrow we file. Laura straightened in her chair. The fear didn't leave. It simply moved aside, making room for something heavier. Resolve. Somewhere across the city, phones rang unanswered. Accounts froze mid-transfer. And people who had spent years hiding behind procedures felt the first real crack in the walls they believed would protect them forever. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where truth was expected to behave. Laura sat on the hard bench outside courtroom 3, bee-spine straight hands, folded eyes forward. She wore a dark coat that wasn't hers, and shoes that pinched, but she didn't adjust them. Discomfort was familiar. She had learned to sit with it. Hannah stood a few feet away, back against the wall, scanning faces. Reporters lingered at the end of the hall, pretending to check phones, while counting every breath that came through the doors. Power had a scent. They could smell it now. Daniel arrived without an entourage. No assistants, no statements, just a presence that made conversations dim around him. He nodded once at Laura. You ready? Laura didn't look at him. No, she said. But I'm here. That's enough, he replied. Inside the courtroom, the air shifted. The defendant's table was full. Suits pressed, ties tight, faces carefully neutral. One of them glanced at Laura and looked away too fast. Guilt didn't like eye contact. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. The rhythm was familiar, rehearsed, but the stakes were anything but. The attorney for the defense rose first. Smooth voice. Controlled smile. This case hinges on a misunderstanding of complex administrative processes. Hannah's jaw tightened. Laura felt her pulse quicken. This was the part they had warned her about. The erosion. The softening of harm into language that sounded harmless. When Laura was called, the walk to the stand felt longer than it was. She could hear her own breathing. Too loud. She placed her hand on the Bible, felt the worn leather under her palm, and sat. The questions came gentle at first. Name, age, background, then sharper. Isn't it true you were confused by the paperwork? Is't it possible you missed a notice? Have you ever struggled with memory? Laura's fingers curled into the fabric of her coat. For a moment, the old fear surged, the urge to apologize, to explain, to shrink. Then she saw Hannah in the gallery, still, focused, watching not with pity but expectation. "No," Laura said. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. "What I struggled with was being told I was a criminal when I asked a question." A murmur rippled through the room. The defense attorney frowned. "Answer the question." "I am," Laura replied. "They didn't misunderstand my claim. They redirected it. They delayed it. And when I pushed back, they threatened me." Silence followed. Heavy, unavoidable. The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." Document after document followed. Logs, emails, transfers. Hannah watched the faces at the defense table tighten as the narrative slipped from their control. This wasn't a mistake anymore. It was a map. When the gavel finally struck for recess, Laura felt her knees weaken. She sat breathing through it. Daniel leaned close. "You did exactly what they didn't expect." Laura looked at him. What's that he met her eyes? "You didn't break." Across the room, the defendants whispered, urgently, walls closing in. The system had met a woman it couldn't intimidate, and it didn't know how to respond to that. The verdict didn't arrive with drama. No gasps, no raised voices. Just a quiet read from the bench that landed like gravity. Guilty on multiple counts. Conspiracy, fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty. The words stacked carefully, each one closing a door that had stayed open for far too long. Laura didn't react at first. Her hands rested in her lap, still folded, as if the moment might evaporate if she moved. It took a few seconds for the sound to reach her. Not applause. The soft shuffle of people standing. The scrape of chairs. Breath released. Across the room, one of the defendants closed his eyes. Another stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tight, a vein pulsed at his temple. Power doesn't collapse loudly. It folds inward. Hannah exhaled for the first time in hours. Not relief. Completion. She watched the prosecutors exchange brief nods, already moving on to next steps, next cases. Systems never fall all at once. They unravel. Daniel stood without expression. He didn't smile. He never did at moments like this. Victory was temporary. Accountability was the point. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Questions sharpened. Laura paused at the top of the steps, the sky pale, and washed out the city humming like nothing monumental had just happened. A reporter pushed forward. "Mrs. Mitchell." "Do you feel vindicated?" Laura considered the word. "No," she said. "I feel heard." Another voice cut in. "What made you come forward when others didn't?" Laura looked past the cameras, found Hannah standing near the railing. "Someone believed me before it was safe to." Hannah didn't move. She didn't wave. She didn't look away either. Daniel stepped beside Laura. The questions shifted instantly. Titles carry weight. He waited until the noise softened. This wasn't a failure of one department, he said. It was a failure of oversight, culture, and courage. We're correcting all three. "Are you resigning?" someone shouted. "No," Daniel replied. Rebuilding. That night, the city felt different, not kinder, not fairer, just a little more exposed. Laura sat in the back seat of the car, watching streetlights blur past. The exhaustion hit her all at once, heavy and deep, but beneath it was something steadier. She had not disappeared. She had not settled. She had not been erased. At a red light, she glanced at Hannah in the front seat. "What happens to you now?" Hannah didn't answer immediately. "Now I stop hiding in plain sight." Laura smiled. Small. Real. Somewhere downtown, offices were being cleared. Files boxed. Signs removed from doors. The system would adapt as it always did. But it would remember this fracture. Because once people see how power bleeds, they start looking for the cracks everywhere. The office on the 22nd floor had windows on 3 sides, and no name on the door. Not yet. Hannah stood inside it, alone, hands resting on the back of a chair that still smelled like new leather, listening to the building breathe around her. Elevators hummed. Phones rang somewhere far below. Power sounded quieter up here. Daniel Cross entered without knocking. He never knocked anymore. "You're early," he said. "I didn't sleep," Hannah replied. He nodded, unsurprised. Neither did half the board. He placed a thin folder on the desk. Not thick, not dramatic. The kind of folder that didn't need weight to matter. "They accepted your terms." Hannah finally turned. "All of them, yes," Daniel said. "Independent authority. Direct access. No buffer between you and federal oversight." She let out a slow breath. "They're scared." "They should be," he replied. "You dismantled something they pretended didn't exist." Hannah looked around the office again. The view. The quiet. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Daniel said. "But you were the one willing to be invisible long enough to see the whole structure." Downstairs, Laura Mitchell stepped out of a taxi and paused on the sidewalk, the building rising above her like a finished chapter. She held a folder of her own, medical approvals, restored benefits, a letter with an apology that didn't quite know how to sound human. It was enough. A passerby bumped her shoulder and murmured an apology without stopping. Laura smiled anyway. For the first time in years, her chest felt light. Inside, Hannah signed the final document. Her signature was steady, no flourish, just her name. The title beneath it would be printed later. Director of Systems Integrity. Daniel watched her closely. "You know this won't make you popular." Hannah met his gaze. "I didn't do this to be liked." He smiled, faint and brief. "Good." The news cycle moved fast. By evening, another headline had replaced theirs. A scandal elsewhere. A distraction. That was how the world worked. But inside the organization, things shifted. Meetings changed tone. Emails grew careful. People asked questions they used to bury. Laura sat at her kitchen table that night, sunlight fading through the window, her phone buzzing with a message from an unknown number. It was Hannah. Just 2 words. "You okay?" Laura typed back. "Yes. Finally." She set the phone down and looked around her apartment. Same walls, same furniture, different air. Across the city, Hannah turned off the lights in her new office and stood for a moment in the dark. She wasn't triumphant. She was ready. Systems didn't need heroes. They needed people who refused to look away when things didn't add up. And she had never been good at looking away. Morning light filled the hospital lobby again, softer this time, filtered through clean glass that reflected people instead of fear. Laura walked in without hesitation, her steps steady, her shoulders no longer pulled inward. The counter was the same, the floor tiles unchanged, but the space felt different, as if something poisonous had been aired out and replaced with oxygen. A young clerk looked up and smiled. Not polite, genuine. "Mrs. Mitchell, your procedure follow-up is confirmed. No issues." Laura nodded, thanked her, and turned away. No one stopped her. No one questioned her presence. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she didn't need to announce herself to be seen. Up on the executive floor, Hannah stood in a meeting room filled with people who once spoke over her. Now they listened. Not because she demanded it, because the system behind her made ignoring her impossible. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority settled around her like gravity. Daniel watched from the end of the table, hands folded, expression unreadable. This was what leadership was supposed to look like. Not control. Accountability. Later that afternoon, Hannah stepped outside, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes," she said quietly. "Proceed." She ended the call and looked up at the sky, clear, bright, the kind of day that didn't ask permission to exist. Across town, Laura sat in a park with a paper cup of coffee, warming her hands. Children ran past. A dog barked. Life moved forward unconcerned, with the battles that made it safer. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the simple fact of peace. She hadn't changed the world. She had changed one outcome. And sometimes that was enough to shift everything else. The system would never be perfect. It never was. But it had been forced to look at itself, and it would remember this fracture long after headlines faded. Somewhere someone would speak up because Laura had. Somewhere else, someone would listen because Hannah refused to stay silent. And somewhere in between, power would think twice before assuming no one was watching. If this story moved you, if you believe quiet courage still matters, take a moment to like and subscribe so stories like this continue to be told. And share your voice in the comments with just 3 words: truth still matters.